From Indianapolis, Indiana, Lucas Oil Stadium, the site of the NFL Scouting Combine. Sports4CLE. It's 4 o'clock and time for Sports4CLE. Thanks for joining us. Plenty on today's show. We'll hear from Kevin Stefanski. We will also be joined by Jared Mueller of Dawgs by Nature. Chris Brown from Buffalo will talk a lot to us about Ken Dorsey and Gabe Davis. Tony Grossi from the Land on Demand. And we have one of the top draft analysts, Dane Brugler from The Athletic, will join us over the next hour. I mentioned Kevin Stefanski met with me today, talked plenty about the offensive coaching staff. Talked about all the turnover that is going on with the Browns offensive coaching staff and what he sees in new Browns offensive coordinator Ken Dorsey.
Year to year, you're constantly looking at different things and what you can do better. There were some unique instances this year as that came up. Obviously there's a bunch of new people in our room, which I view as a positive, and the conversations that we've had already have been, great. I think Ken's done a great job with the new coaches, but to have Deuce in there, to have Tommy Rees, Andy Dickerson, Roy, these are guys that come from different perspectives, obviously different teams, different schemes. So we're still in the infancy of putting it back together. We're actually meeting here. Ken has the guys meeting while they're here at the Combine. He's working them hard, but we're still working through all of that, but it's been great conversation. Yeah, Ken's a guy, I've kind of known Ken for a while. We've stayed in touch. Similar to what we were talking about earlier, having that background as a quarterback, I think you can't discount that, how important that is. And I think in Buffalo, as we saw, as we competed against them and as you study them, I mean, very, very explosive in their offense, did a variety of things through the run and the pass that are exciting.
Kevin Stefanski talking about Ken Dorsey, of course, the high-profile position, the offensive coordinator. Browns also have Deuce Staley, new running backs coach, Andy Dickerson, new offensive line coach, Tommy Rees, new tight ends coach. Dorsey, though, is a guy that called plays for a couple of years, including at his last stop with the Buffalo Bills. So the logical question, who's going to call the plays for the Browns offense?
I think where we are right now, Tony, in our looking at the offense, putting it back together, I don't know if that decision's important right this minute, so I'll let you know as soon as I've made a decision. Yeah, it's a big difference, and I can't speak to Ken's experience. I would just tell you the way Ken and I see the game, the way we work together, he's really, really going to help me a ton. I'm going to help Ken. I mean, it's a relationship where we really are helping each other put this offense together. And I think that's just maybe more unique. That's not a situation that he's been in before.
Yeah, I think Ken, again, going back to his background, is varied. So he's somebody that, there's not many plays that he hasn't run or different systems that he hasn't run. So he's open-minded. I think that's where we are as an offensive staff right now as we put this thing back together, is what fits our guys. What are the best things that we feel like are going to be concepts, run game, pass game that fit our guys. And I think Ken's uniquely positioned to do that.
So one thing Ken Dorsey brings is experience with mobile quarterbacks to the Browns. Deshaun Watson, a mobile quarterback. He's worked with Cam Newton, Carolina Panthers, as well as Josh Allen with the Bills in his last stop. So the question is, how does Ken Dorsey's experience benefit Deshaun Watson?
Ken's been in a bunch of different systems. I know most recently you mentioned Dave's and what they're doing in Buffalo, but Ken has been in versions of Norv's system, which I was also in when he was in Carolina. So he sees the game we see the game very similarly, but all of his experiences, I think, are important in what he brings with him. Ken has had a lot of experience with a bunch of different quarterbacks, but notably, like you mentioned, Josh Allen, Cam Newton. As we all know, that the game in this NFL is evolving constantly year to year. So I think Ken is a person with his experience, with what he's been exposed to. I feel really confident with him running our meetings, making sure that we're staying ahead of the curve.
So Andrew Berry confirmed yesterday that Deshaun Watson will begin throwing in March sometime. Remember, coming off the shoulder surgery, as well as some rotator cuff soreness and injuries that caused him to miss time a season ago. Kevin Stefanski was asked status of Watson and how do you keep him healthy?
Yeah, he's coming along. I know he's going to start throwing here shortly. He's hitting all of his milestones. Ken and I are going to go out and see him next week and spend some time, not talk football, just catch up. Won't see him throw, but just want to, check in on him. But I text him almost every day, so he's in a good place. We'll go out to LA.
Deshaun has always been very mobile. He will always continue to be very mobile. We'll always teach him and coach him up on being smart because he's a great player for us. We don't want him to get injured, as we know, as important as that position is. But that's always going to be part of his game. So Ken and I will constantly, coach all of our quarterbacks to make sure they're taking care of themselves.
All right, so the other thing that's interesting to note, the use of motion. Browns were second last in the league. Only the Philadelphia Eagles used less motion in their offense a season ago. Kevin Stefanski was asked, was that by design?
I'd hesitate to look in too much to last year in that regard. I think motion, speaking of conflict, I think it can make life really hard on the defense. I speak from experience. When that picture's changing pre-play, it can make it really a challenge. You can put your receivers in advantageous positions via motion. I think what Coach McDaniel did in Miami was really those were new things that are now, you're going to see that throughout the league. But there's certainly elements to it. I think what we talk about a lot is you want to shift and motion with a purpose. You don't want to do it just to do it. But if there are opportunities to create advantageous looks for you, you certainly want to do it.
Well, the Browns started 4 quarterbacks who won games for them a season ago, still found a way to make the playoffs. Obviously a good job of incorporating and building the offense around skill sets of specific quarterbacks. The question is, though, did that hurt Elijah Moore in his first season here, all the different quarterbacks?
I do. I mean, you look at Elijah's, just look at the numbers. I mean, he has a career year, and I think that was for a reason. I mean, I feel really strongly about him, the player. As you know, when you are moving different quarterbacks in there, that can affect it. You look at the Jets game where Amari's out, and Elijah went right to the focal part and was making plays up and down the field before he got hurt. So I know what he's capable of, and after a career year, we anticipate him even getting better.
So the Browns still counting very much on Elijah Moore to be a big part of that receiving core. The other thing that we found out yesterday, the Browns will, in fact, go to Greenbrier to start training camp again. All of the players talked about the experience and how it helped them build the closeness that was the hallmark of the team. Kevin Stefanski was asked about the decision to go back to Greenbrier for training camp next year.
Going down there, Scott, first time for us to go through that experience, and really it was coming out of that, we all felt really strong that it was a positive experience. Now, is it going to manifest itself in wins and those type of things? It's so hard to know coming out of those, but the staff down there was outstanding. Our staff put on a great operation, if you will. We got a lot of work done, so I thought it was important to do it again. Yeah, it's all a factor. I think that was part of going down there in the first place, was getting our guys under one roof. As you know, really bad cell phone service down there, which is a good thing. So just to see our guys spending time together outside of football, I just think all of that adds up.
Time for us to take a quick time out here in Indianapolis. Other side of the break, we continue talking Browns. Jared Mueller from Dawgs by Nature joins us. Sports4CLE continues from the NFL Scouting Combine in Indianapolis, Indiana. Stay with us.
Here comes the rush.
All right, everybody, let's take 5. With one of these 5 Lady Luck scratch-offs from the Ohio Lottery.
Like the $10 Lady Luck 50X. It's got prizes all the way up to $500,000, so you could really clean up.
The Lady Luck family of scratch-offs is the Ohio Lottery's first ever, with 5 price points from $1 to $20. They're an easy way to cook up some fun.
Sports4CLE continues from the NFL Scouting Combine in Indianapolis, Indiana. Back in the background, you will see Lucas Oil Stadium, where all of the drills will be going on starting tomorrow. Some player availability earlier today. We're talking Browns, though. Kevin Stefanski addressed the media. We're pleased to be joined by Jared Mueller from Dawgs by Nature. And, Jared, you were there. We both listened to Kevin Stefanski talking. Let's start with the wide receiving core. My big takeaway was the Browns and Kevin Stefanski are a lot higher on Elijah Moore than probably most fans at this point.
Absolutely. You heard him talk about when Amari Cooper was out and Moore was placed into a higher role. And I think that's really important to realize is position and role really decides production. And so if Elijah Moore is getting 2 targets, 3 targets, he's just not able to produce. But it does seem really clear that the Browns may not see the wide receiver position the same way fans do. You know, Cedric Tillman last year, Elijah Moore, Amari Cooper. It could be interesting because fans, like quarterbacks, always want more weapons.
The other thing was Ken Dorsey was a slam dunk in his mind.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely almost universal that Ken Dorsey is a really good offensive coordinator. It's really interesting to look that the Bills' offense was worse last year after Dorsey left. Everyone loves Dorsey. Everyone loves how hard of a worker he is. They talk a lot about how competitive he is, especially on the basketball court. So it'll be interesting if one Myles Garrett wants to play against his new offensive coordinator, as he loves basketball as well.
What positions do you think the Browns target in free agents? Free agency gets underway in a couple of weeks, I think it's 10 days, something like that. Where do you think they look? There are some areas that need to be upgraded. What do they do you think?
I think they're going to look at bringing a lot of their guys back. The defensive line, whether it's Shelby Harris, Maurice Hurst, and then at the linebacker position with Sione Takitaki, I think those are going to really be their priorities, is to bring back those guys. After that, if they can't do that or if things get a little slow, I think that's where you're going to see them maybe look at a tight end. Jordan Akins really didn't kind of work out this year. And then I think running back, you look, it doesn't sound like Kareem Hunt's going to come back based on Mary Kay Cabot's report. And so do you need that veteran, an Austin Eckler who can help out as Nick Chubb returns and then be a really good complementary back when Chubb is fully healthy?
Well, the other thing that came out today was the restructuring of Denzel Ward's contract. It's not a surprise, even a little bit, but it does get him under the cap and gives him some room already.
Yeah, really quickly, the Browns went from $22 million over the cap to a new salary cap was announced. Denzel Ward's restructure, and all of a sudden they have some cap room. I think from a negotiating perspective, it's really going to be interesting because time is really on their side. Negotiate with a couple $1 million of cap space, and then if you need it, you restructure Deshaun Watson or some of those other players. But you don't want the agents to know you might have $33 million in cap space. Hey, we only have 5, we only have 6. We got to be a little careful here.
Do you expect some, with the cap going up, $30.5 million, whatever it was, do you expect some ridiculous contracts to be handed out? When it happened in the NBA, it was ludicrous.
It really was, and whether it's back in the day, Ron Mercer to the Chicago Bulls, or even for Cleveland, a lot of people thought that about Tristan Thompson, J.R. Smith, some of their contracts. I think you're going to see that this year, especially because this draft class isn't that good. People are going to want to be competitive, and they have the money to spend. There is still a floor over a 3-year period, so I think you're going to see some really interesting contracts. I think what the Browns did last year with their veterans, Joe Flacco, Shelby Harris, some of those guys, you might see a few more veterans wanting to come in to Cleveland this year.
The other thing that is really interesting, play calling. Somebody asked the question, and Kevin Stefanski has not even thought about answering that yet.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because Ken Dorsey is known as a great designer. Kevin Stefanski, while fans may not always believe this, is a really good in-game play caller. He's able to kind of structure an offense around plays in the first quarter that look like plays in the third quarter, but there's enough there. I think it'll be really interesting to see. I think he's willing to give up play calling, but what's best for the team really is all that matters to him. And I think allowing Dorsey to really focus on the quarterbacks, focus on the design, really might be the best thing for the Browns moving forward.
So would you be surprised if Ken Dorsey was calling the plays, I guess?
I wouldn't be surprised. I'm just not sure from a personality perspective that that's probably what's best for him right now. I think he might learn from Kevin Stefanski this year and then take over next year.
Yeah, you kind of alluded to this. Anybody that you talk to from Buffalo, and a little bit later in the show, we'll have Chris Brown, a Bills reporter, but anybody you talk to regarding Ken Dorsey thinks he is a good offensive coordinator and borderline great quarterback coach.
Yeah, it's interesting. Our Buffalo Rumbling site, they look at this decision to fire him, and he was fired because of defense, special teams, and some timeout calls that were or were not, and some interceptions that Josh should not have thrown, Josh Allen. So it really seems scapegoatish. But again, the Bills had a good season, so it's easy to look and say, well, they were struggling, they fired Dorsey, and then things turned around. But it doesn't seem like it was because of Dorsey's play calling and role as an offensive coordinator.
All right, I know we're jumping around a little bit. Let's go back to free agency. Do you expect them to chase a wide receiver, and what tier or type of wide receiver?
I think you're going to see similar to the Marquise Goodwin kind of signing, whether that is a speed guy or that's a size guy. I think they're going to look very specifically. Amari Cooper can do everything. Elijah Moore kind of gives them that slot receiver. Cedric Tillman is someone developing, but really kind of struggle with some of his route running and detail orientation. So you're going to see if he can develop. I think you're going to see them get that lower level 1 year, $2 million kind of dollar contract for a veteran.
Anybody that you think that would be a great fit with?
You know, I'll just be honest, I haven't spent a lot of time yet there, but I think the reality is that this year the Browns are going to be reactive to the market a little bit because we really don't know how people are going to spend money.
Yeah, and they don't have as much of it as a lot of teams. This offensive staff, do you like the way they remade it?
I like that they went in a different direction. I think we saw it last year with Jim Schwartz, right? Is a fiery, feisty kind of coach. You know, I asked Kevin about it today. He didn't give a full answer, but the reality is it went really well last year to go with Bubba and Jim. I think it'll go really, really well this year. Deuce is a fiery guy. Dorsey's a fiery guy. Tommy Reese, young, developing guy. I think it's going to be really a good fit overall.
Reese is a guy that intrigues me. I am curious. He has 2 years of play calling experience, one for Nick Saban at Alabama and one at Notre Dame.
Yeah, I mean, if Brian Kelly thinks you're good enough and Nick Saban thinks you're good enough, I think you're good enough, right? It's not guaranteed, and he's coming in as a tight ends coach, passing game coordinator. I think that just says something about him that he's willing to say, you know what, I'm willing to step down a little bit to come to the NFL, and we know a lot of guys are kind of trying to get out of the college coaching ranks. I think he got ahead of it.
Do you think they have the pieces in place to do what they need to do designing this offense?
I think they do. I do have some concerns about the offensive line with Bill Callahan leaving. And obviously, again, it comes back down to Deshaun Watson. He's recovering from an injury that is a little bit concerning. We got to see it on the field.
Yeah, you can't really find anybody that's come back from that kind of injury who plays quarterback in the NFL.
Yeah, and I think we just assume now that everybody can come back from everything because they have Achilles injuries, ACLs, it doesn't matter. But structural damage is really concerning because how do you rebuild bone in a way that it stays healthy?
Jared Mueller from Dawgs by Nature and I are going to step aside, take a quick timeout. We will continue talking Browns from the NFL Scouting Combine in Indianapolis, Indiana. Stay with us on Sports4CLE.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
The NFL is gathering in Indianapolis, Indiana for the NFL Scouting Combine. Players will be doing the drills starting tomorrow at Lucas Oil Stadium. The Sports4CLE continues from Indianapolis, Indiana, along with Jared Mueller from Dawgs by Nature. I'm Dave Bacon. Jared, let's switch to the defensive side of the football. Year one from Jim Schwartz was pretty good. Can you expect year two to get better?
I think it's going to be tough, just to be honest. I think we talk about regression to the mean in a lot of ways in sports. I think we have to be aware of that. You had a lot of players who were really frustrated by the last system, and so they were playing really at their top of their game, and so you can expect a little regression. You also have a few players. We got a lot of people on the defensive line going into free agency, so I think a step back could be interesting. I think also it's imperative that Jim Schwartz shows some adjustments. We saw it in the Houston game. We saw it in a lot of those motion-oriented offenses. He needs to show some adjustment, and so I think that could also kind of see a step back kind of during the regular season as he tries to adjust.
Yeah, the thing that I'm curious about, does a year enable them to communicate a little bit better? Because I think that's what, that motion creates. You got to be, the defense has to communicate with each other.
They do, but they're also, Schwartz's system is set up to attack, right? And so if you are told to attack, your secondary nature is also to attack, then everything else kind of becomes a little bit more difficult at that point in time. And so you're really trying to, his defense tries to dictate to the offense, but when offenses are smart, they can dictate what he can't do and what is available. Even a green dog blitz from JOK was set up that tight end long kind of leak out. They knew it was coming.
You mentioned JOK. He took a huge step forward in this system. Is it fair to expect him to keep getting better?
I think it is really fair. He got bigger and stayed fast and really kind of was able to kind of take on that kind of middle linebacker, call the defense while still playing kind of outside and doing all that kind of stuff. I think it's going to be really interesting as we get to contract negotiations, right? So second round pick, 4-year contract, was expected to be a top 10, 15 pick. So I think he's going to be a really interesting guy that they're going to try to lock up as soon as they're able to after year 3.
Another guy that you mentioned, the free agents on the line, Zadarius Smith. Now, the sack numbers were not huge, but it's important to note, Myles Garrett was the defensive player of the year he was next to or part of that defensive line.
Yeah, and that was actually a really big change. For the first 3 years, they really focused on kind of that bigger guy across from him to kind of hold the pocket, hold that side. Zadarius can do a little bit of that, but his quickness and his speed around the edge and his versatility to work on in the inside really opened things up for Myles because there was just a little bit more chaos. So the pressure numbers were up. Obviously, the sack numbers weren't where they wanted to be. An emotional leader, we saw that when he's trying to celebrate with the Browns fans in the restaurant down there. So a really interesting player that the team really wants to have back. But again, that huge salary cap jump is really going to be interesting, what kind of money he gets.
Yeah, you could see somebody give him a significant amount of over where the Browns want to go. The other thing what are your thoughts just on the contract situation? Do you see anybody, we know that Ward was restructured. Do you see them doing that to like a Jack Conklin and trying to push things to incentives so that you can guard against another injury-filled season?
I think they're going to try. Conklin's contract is set up in a way that the player has a lot of the leverage there, as opposed to Nick Chubb. We expect that that's going to be an extension or some kind of adjustment. Conklin's contract's really difficult. They can actually do some restructuring with Jedrick Wills' fifth-year option that can open up some cap space. Again, they have a lot of that flexibility if players are in the range that they think are appropriate.
You mentioned JOK. What do you think they do with Greg Newsome? I would assume, I think the number came out when the cap went out. The fifth-year option is like $13.3 million. I'm assuming they're going to pick it up and figure out what they do relative to long-term later.
Yeah, I had this conversation with someone in the league. Even if Greg Newsome was a top 50 cornerback, and we can talk about that later, I think asset allocation is going to make it really difficult for the Browns to hold on to him long term if you believe Martin Emerson is similarly talented or even a little bit better. And so I think trading Greg Newsome, not because he's not good and all of those kind of things that some of the fans will say, oftentimes Newsome is the one chasing things down because things broke down. He just happens to be that cornerback. So I think from an asset allocation, he makes sense as a trade candidate. And in the NFL, cornerbacks are always really highly valued. It'll just be interesting. Can they get a third? Can they get a second? Can they get a player along with that? Just to kind of, not because Greg's not good, but to try to figure out what the roster needs to look like.
Well, the other thing is, cornerback is the position. They seem to be able to identify guys that can play in the. I mean, doesn't matter. Cameron Mitchell, Greg Newsome, MJ Emerson. That's been the sweet spot for these guys drafted.
They haven't. Even AJ Green did a really good job for the team as an undrafted free agent. And it's interesting. Cameron Mitchell is a very good friend of Greg Newsome's, but it seems like drafting him did create some opportunity to move on from Greg because you have those other guys on the outside.
When you look at the draft, what position do you think they look at? I know you're laughing. Let's go second and third round, so the first couple of picks.
Trade? I mean, the reality is everyone I've talked to, this is a depth draft. There's a few star players up top, and everything else, you really are looking how trade out, or do you just take that solid player? And so I think you're going to continue to see them look at positions of premium, a defensive end, a defensive tackle, a cornerback, a wide receiver. Who are you paying a lot of money to, and can you get those guys at a little bit of a cheaper cost? But it wouldn't shock me with how full this roster can be, depending on who they bring back, that they're looking to kind of move back or move out a little bit, or even bring in that veteran player.
What positions are considered deep in this draft?
The really interesting thing is the running back position is considered deep, which could lead to the top running back not going till the third round. Because at this point in time, you have 10 to 12 running backs that could be drafted between the third, fourth, and fifth rounds. Do you want to be the team that takes the first one in the second round and then there's a big gap there? Because you could find a similar back 2 rounds later. I think running back is going to be the really interesting position that I wouldn't be shocked to see the Browns kind of double up on.
So the Andrew Berry's shown he'll move up, he'll move down. What do you think is more, if somebody slides, do you see them moving up and trying to get him? He has shown that.
It really just depends on how those draft picks are valued by other teams. They've got a lot of those fifth-round picks and those kind of things. I think he's willing to do that. I think having 8 selections again is, a little too much for this team. And so if they can package a little bit to move up, I could see, again, those premium positions, that defensive end especially. But even if a Xavier Worthy out of Texas, a speedster, a little bit better version of Travis Benjamin, really able to open up the defense, I think he's willing to make those moves as we kind of get to that point.
The other thing is, because of NIL and what's going on at the college ranks, not a lot of underclassmen in this draft. Are you hearing the same thing that I am, that round 6 and 7 are challenging to find players?
Yeah, I mean, we've literally lost 50% of underclassmen in 3 seasons, right? And so, we're at 54, I believe, this year. And so a lot of older players, we've got a lot of COVID 6-year seniors, those kind of players. And so for the Browns, who have often valued age, all of a sudden you just don't have a lot of those kind of players. And so do you take a risk on a guy with some upside? Do you take a risk on a guy with injury? Last year they made a trade with the Baltimore Ravens so they could get a future, probably starting offensive lineman, just because they didn't have a lot of players they valued there. So I think it'll be really interesting what they do with those extra picks.
All right, before I let you go, a running back that you like, if they're there, you think would fit well with the Browns?
There's actually 2. Blake Corum, obviously, out of that team up north. Sorry, as a Buckeye, I have to say it that way. Right, that school up north. But Trey Benson out of Florida State, I think he's a 3-down back who can do a lot of things. I think he's really explosive, but I also think he can run between the tackles. So that would be the guy that I would really look at, partially because I'm a little biased against that other team.
Jared Mueller, Dawgs by Nature, as always. Appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much, Jared.
Absolutely, brother.
Jared Mueller, make sure you check him out. Dawgs by Nature, always really good Browns coverage. We're going to step aside, take a quick time out. We continue talking Browns on Sports4CLE from the NFL Scouting Combine in Indianapolis, Indiana. Stay with us. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program is dedicated to recognizing exceptional students, teachers, and schools throughout Ohio. Scan the QR code on screen to nominate students and teachers as Academic All-Stars and Teachers of the Month. They must be currently enrolled or teach in grades K through 12. Is your K through 12 school developing students' literacy skills to achieve success in reading? If so, you can nominate your school for the School of the Year. Students can win $100, teachers can win $500, and schools can win $2,500. Scan the QR code, fill out the forms, and nominate
deserving students, teachers, and schools today. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program takes pride in honoring exceptional students, teachers, and schools across Ohio. Submit your nomination today. It's fun, fast, and free.
Sports4CLE continues from the NFL Scouting Combine in Indianapolis, Indiana. We've heard Kevin Stefanski talk a little bit earlier today. We were pleased to be joined by Tony Grossi, longtime Browns beat reporter, ESPN Cleveland, and the Land on Demand website. Always really good stuff. Tony, when you look at this offseason and kind of, free agency starts, in a matter of days, what do the Browns need to do in your mind? What are the most glaring needs?
I think there are two glaring needs this year that are pretty obvious, at least to me. Still a wide receiver need for a really good one, not just a body. A guy could run fast and catch, a deeper threat to complement Amari Cooper. And then they still don't have that stud defensive tackle that Jim Schwartz really covets and has had with all of his stops in the NFL. They need to apply more pressure from the interior of that line. They're going to be facing a lot more good quarterbacks on their schedule this year, and I think that's the best way to be up for that. So you have free agency and you have the drafts, and you got to choose which avenue do you look to fill those needs. And I would think free agency, you'd find the D tackle, and the draft I would use on the receiver.
When you look at free agency, word came out that they restructured Denzel Ward's contract earlier today. That's obviously not a surprise. They know the contracts they're going to restructure ahead of time.
Right. Yeah, I think Andrew Berry has a number that he wants to get to, like under the cap, and he'll get there. I mean, they're smart. This is their strike zone. They know how to not manipulate, but work the cap. And there'll probably be other restructurings. But I'm sure they have a budget. They want to be, let's say, $50 million under the cap by March 13th, which is when the cap starts taking effect. And then they have a budget as to how much they'll spend in free agency. So they'll get there one way or the other. It's not going to affect whether Deshaun Watson has more salary bonus, signing bonus, cash bonus. It doesn't matter to the average fan.
When you look at free agency, Andrew Berry has been pretty good about, Hargraves comes to mind last year. He took some heat for not going above his number. Same thing with Draymond Jones. Does that play into an advantage? Because cap's going up, and I would imagine there's going to be some silly money with some of these guys.
Yeah, well, when you mention defensive tackle in particular, two of the best are probably not going to be available. Chris Jones of Kansas City and who's the other guy? Justin Madubuike of Baltimore. So I think last year they failed to get their top target, which was Javon Hargrave. Then they went to Draymond Jones, didn't get him. And then they went to Delvin Tomlinson, which is a good player, but it's still not the stud tackle that I think Schwartz wants and the Browns want. So you're going to have to try again, but there's only so many of those guys, and I don't even know who would be next in line. Christian Wilkins of Miami comes to mind, but after him, I don't know who. So you make do. If you don't get them there, you accommodate with these one-year deal guys like Maurice Hurst coming back or something like that.
Now, you mentioned drafting a wide receiver. We on Sports4CLE, we've taken a look at this a couple of times. The wide receivers the Browns have drafted since 2010, it's a frightening lot. One first-rounder, Corey Coleman, a second-rounder, Greg Little. If you count the supplemental pick of Josh Gordon, he's a second-rounder. And then third-rounders are the guys that are here. It's David Bell, Tillman, and Anthony Schwartz is no longer.
Right.
It's a passing league, and they've failed to find wide receivers and quarterbacks. I think that sums up the struggles.
Yeah, and that's why they had to overpay for the quarterback, Deshaun Watson. And they kind of overpaid for Amari Cooper, not in trade value, but in salary number. So that's the problem. If you don't receivers are like quarterbacks in that you want the real good ones in their rookie contract. Because if you don't get them and then you go looking for them in free agency, you're paying out, way out of bounds. So you're right. Let's just limit it to Andrew Berry's 4 drafts. He hasn't used anything higher than a 3rd-round pick for a receiver because he's traded out of number 2 years in a row. They thought they were getting that guy in Elijah Moore with the trade with the Jets last year, and it didn't work out, but he's still a decent player, still on his rookie contract. That's why I advocate using your 2nd-round pick. This is a very deep receiver class, once again, and if you just stay where you're at 54, you might find the guy you're looking for.
What type of wide receiver, if you will? Do they need a big body? What profile do you think maximizes Deshaun Watson?
They got the big body in Cedric Tillman last year. I think they want speed first and productive and a major program. There's going to be someone there at 54. So I think speed with a nod toward Deshaun Watson. You want a guy to get down the field. I think it's pretty cut and dry that I would think that's the Browns' main mission here at the Combine is to be able to evaluate, can we get that guy at 54? And if they decide, yeah, we can, then they get back home to free agency next week, and then they look for D tackles in free agency, I think.
When you talk about, Deshaun Watson, do you think all of the moves that were made on the offensive side of the ball are kind of aimed at finding a way to maximize? It sure seems to me.
Absolutely.
Am I reading too much into that or not?
No, I mean, it started with the selection of Ken Dorsey as a coordinator. That's the reason Alex Van Pelt isn't there anymore. They felt they needed a guy more versed in the dual threat quarterback, which is Watson. Dorsey's done that. And I also think that this idea of searching for that wideout who can stretch a field is geared towards Watson also. I liked the pickup of Marquise Goodwin last year, and they just could never get him the ball when he was healthy, and he wasn't healthy all the time, So, and he was a little guy, really, but remember that first game against Cincinnati, man? He had 2 touchdowns waiting to happen, and the ball couldn't get to him. And then, for a variety of reasons, they never tapped his speed. So, everything I think this year is geared towards Watson once again.
It's kind of interesting. So Kevin Stefanski's won 2 Coach of the Years in his 4 seasons. Andrew Berry's put together what most people think is a pretty solid roster. Is there more pressure on Deshaun Watson than Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski coming into this year? Because those 2 guys have done pretty much what they're supposed to do.
No, I think it's obvious. It is on Watson, and maybe that's part of the problem. He's got so much going on above the shoulders, what he's been through in his personal life, and then the expectations that came with that trade and that contract, and then his inability to stay on the field. I think all of that is affecting his play. He's got to get over the hump, which means if he could have played after that good game against Baltimore, then you got Pittsburgh, and then he does it again, has a good game, then he's on his way. That's what he's got to do. He's got to string some good games together to restore confidence in himself and confidence from everyone else.
Yeah, I don't know about you, when I saw the Baltimore thing, I'm like, that's what you want. Not the first half. Now the second half, that's what you want. You gave the ball to him, and he found he was on one leg, basically. We didn't know at the time he was playing on one leg and one shoulder.
Yeah, I mean, we couldn't pinpoint where that shoulder got fractured. But you're right. I wanted to see the next game after, just like when he had the good game against Tennessee in Game 2. Then there was an interruption in Game 3.
Yeah.
And then he finally gets back again, has a good game. He played Arizona really well. Then he plays Baltimore with that big half, and you want to see it again. I mean, Patrick Mahomes, every week there's a highlight reel, and Lamar Jackson. I mean, you got to play, and he knows it, and that's part of the thing that's compounding the problem is confidence and staying healthy and playing
and stringing them together. How do you get confidence? You play well for an extended period of time. When you When you think about this team, you've got three guys that are starting quality tackles. And it sure sounds like they don't plan on doing anything with them from what Andrew Berry was talking about.
Yeah, now all are coming back from injuries, but let's just assume they're all healthy. It's not a bad problem to have. They went through 5 tackles this year.
Yeah.
So, if they needed to create more room or they needed something else, they have a little surplus there, but it's too valuable. You need 4 tackles, right? 4 solid tackles, and they learned that last year. So I think they're in great shape at offensive line, not only a tackle but interior too. So that is the strength of the team, and that's where they dump the most resources into. And I don't think it's a problem to have 3 good tackles.
What do you think? Obviously, I would assume they pick up Greg Newsome's 5th-year option, and then after that, I'm not sure what they do.
Yeah, they have to make that decision by May 2nd. I'm sure they'll pick it up, which means his 5th-year salary next year goes to like $13 million, which is a lot of money for a number 3 cornerback on a team. Mm-hmm. The Browns have 3 good cornerbacks, but he is number 3. And he'll be making a lot of money. So who knows what happens at that point? We'll see what the situation is with the other 2 at that point. But I would expect them to pick up his option.
And then it's important to note, Emerson doesn't have that 5th-year option because he's a 3rd-round pick.
Right.
So that's coming in a little bit on top
of that. But after the 24 season, Emerson will have 3 years in the bank, and he'll be eligible if they want to extend him. So it gets expensive, but the GM has to worry about 2-3 years down the line. The rest of us don't. None of that is going to affect 2024, and that's pretty much what I think the owner cares about too. The window's open.
Absolutely.
Take advantage of it.
That's where I'm going. You're looking at this team. What should their goals be? What should their expectations be?
David, they have to win the division. They have to host a playoff game. It makes the path to the Super Bowl so much shorter. Listen, I didn't expect what happened in Houston at all last year, the wild card game. That was a cold towel to everyone's face, I think, the organization. But if you're playing that first game at home, look at Houston took advantage of that. I don't think Houston does that in Cleveland if they have to go to Cleveland. So that should be the goal. I hate the wild card because it's almost false hope. It's so difficult. Kansas City went on the road, but they're a superstar team. So they got to win the division, and then I think they're in good shape. Well, I'll take my chances hosting that first game and then moving on from there.
Tony Grossi, ESPN Cleveland, the Land on Demand. Thanks so much for the time and the insight. I appreciate it very much. Again, that's Tony Grossi from ESPN Cleveland, the Land on Demand. We're going to step aside, take a quick time out. We will have more of Sports for CLE from the NFL Scouting Combine in Indianapolis, Indiana. Stay with us.
All right, everybody. Let's take 5. With one of these 5 Lady Luck scratch-offs from the Ohio Lottery.
Like the $1 Lady Luck 5X. Because the pink really pops like my safety vest. Plus a $1,000 grand prize really hammers it home for me.
And this $2 10X really nails it for me. $2 for a shot at 10 grand? That's rock solid.
The Lady Luck family of scratch-offs is the Ohio Lottery's first ever with 5 price points from $1 to 20. They're built for fun.
Sports for CLE continues from the NFL Scouting Combine in Indianapolis, Indiana. All the prospects starting to come out. They'll be doing the different drills starting tomorrow. But we're pleased to be joined by Chris Brown, who is a team reporter for the Buffalo Bills. We've talked so much on this show about Ken Dorsey, the new offensive coordinator for the Browns, who was with the Bills, let go midseason. You know him as well as anybody. What does Ken Dorsey kind of bring to an offense?
Yeah, first and foremost, intensity. He's a guy that even on the practice field brings an edge to the practice setting. So the energy level is not going to be a problem at practice. That's number one, because he's as competitive as they come. And then as far as handling Deshaun Watson and the offense, I think there are some buzz phrases that he often uses with his quarterbacks. One of them is conservative, smart, not conservative. That's one of the phrases that he uses with Josh Allen a lot of the time. And then a lot of the time he'll tell his guys, us or nobody. And what that means is if you're going to put a ball in a tight space, make sure you're putting it somewhere where only our guy can get it or nobody can get it. And that's just some of the buzz phrases that you often hear on the practice field when he's talking to his quarterbacks.
A lot was made that he kind of, quote-unquote, unlocked Josh Allen or helped make Josh Allen the quarterback that he is, which is one of the best in the NFL, quite frankly. Is that reasonable to say? I mean, Josh Allen credited him with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think Brian Daboll did a lot of the grunt work at the start of Josh Allen's career. Now, Ken was there as the quarterback's coach before he replaced Daboll as offensive coordinator, so he deserves credit as well, certainly for Josh's development and the fine-tuning of his game. And I think that was the challenge for Ken when he ascended into the OC role, because the offense had already been pretty well established. He inherited a system that was already working, so that's a challenge too, because now you've got to try to put your stamp on it but not change too much to the detriment of your quarterback. So I think navigating all of that, Ken did a good job with that to keep the offense at a very high level. As a matter of fact, his first year after Daboll left, the offense was better in a lot of different categories across the board. So I think that's something to be encouraged about if you're the Browns.
When he Josh Allen came out and said, he helped him. How much was that relationship? How was that relationship between Josh Allen and Ken Dorsey?
Yeah, I think it was very healthy. I mean, Josh gets along with everybody. He's a very affable personality. So if you can't get along with Josh Allen, you probably have a problem. That being said, I think what worked well for those two was the competitive level that both of them have internally. They're very self-motivated, and I know a lot of players are at this level, because if you're not, you probably don't get to this level in the first place. But I think the competitive juice that both of those men have inside them is what kind of had them, kind of operating and seeing things the same way.
When he was let go, the team was, I think it was 5-5 or something along those lines, and they were struggling. Was it just a matter of a change, or was it? Do you think it was more than that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there were some things that were happening with the team where they just couldn't get out of their own way. Slow starts at the beginning of games for the offense, and then before you know it, you're behind on the scoreboard. Now you're playing catch up, and it was a problem that was repeating itself far too often for an offense that had been remarkably consistent in years past. So it was something that they were trying to figure out, trying different things. I would say if there was one thing that stuck out, I think Ken, being as competitive as he is, when things don't go right, he doubles down and tries to work even harder. And I think he put a lot of pressure on himself, and I think the pressure that he put on himself kind of trickled down to the players, and then the players started gripping and getting tight on the field in games. And I think Coach McDermott and Coach Dorsey, when they're trying as hard as they can to fix what was ailing them, I think it got to a point where it's like, well, whatever it is, it's just not working right now. So the most effective way to course correct the offense was to make a change at the top. I know in his heart of hearts, Coach McDermott did not want to do that. He values his coaches, and I think he still values Ken Dorsey as a coach in this league. But the team was on life support at that time, and they had to make a change or the season was going to be lost.
And in reality, they made it into the playoffs, so. Let's talk a little bit about a guy that's a free agent that has been attached to the Browns, most likely because of Ken Dorsey, Gabe Davis, a wide receiver.
Yeah, I mean, relentless worker. I don't think anybody works as hard as Gabe does. I think the problem that surfaced for him as far as this season and to a certain extent last season was the roller coaster of his production. He had 7 games last season where he had 1 or no catches. And that's not the description that you want for a number 2 receiver in your offense. So he's got to find a way to smooth out the peaks and valleys of his season to provide consistent production, and he really struggled with that this year. I don't know this for a fact, but I know he really worked to put muscle on his frame over the last year and a half, and he successfully did that, again, speaking to his work ethic. But I also think it slowed him down on the field. Like, it's almost like he was too muscular, and I think it compromised his separation ability. So I'm very interested to see what his approach is this offseason, knowing he has a chance to make money on a big contract, because there is enough production there in his body of work to warrant that. But I think he recognizes, I've got to find a way to get back to week consistency that really just flat out was not there this past season.
He's a guy that always seemed to come up big in big games, though. I mean, the big game Gabe is that. If you look at it, there's some truth to that.
Yes, I mean, there are a lot of attractive qualities about his game. Will battle for the ball in contested situations and often win. Strong hands in that regard. I think some of his footwork along the sideline and the end line is among the best in the league. I think he wants to make his catch rate better. Now, you look at his career catch rate, and it's somewhere between 50 and 55%. I think he knows that has to be better. In fairness to him, a lot of the catches he was asked to make were low percentage throws deep down the field. So his number is going to be lower than, say, a slot receiver that works underneath a lot on high percentage throws that travel 10 yards in the air. This guy's tracking balls 40 yards down the field. So his catch rate is going to be lower, but I know he was not happy with that number, and I think he wants to make it better too. I think it's got to be up around 65% to be the kind of receiver he wants to be.
You mentioned his work ethic. How well received was he, as a teammate?
Very well received. I mean, he was a team captain last year, as a 24-year-old. I think that speaks to the respect he had on the roster. And like I said, I think it's rooted in his daily work ethic and, coming to the field every day in practice, whether it's week 2 or week 17, and bringing it every single day. And this was a guy that probably played outside of the offensive lineman and the quarterback, played more snaps on the field than anybody else on the offensive side of the ball. I mean, he's a guy that grinds. He can play hurt. But yeah, I mean, I think universally respected by the guys in that locker room.
As always, appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much. Again, giving us the insight on Ken Dorsey, Gabe Davis, from the Buffalo Bills perspective. We're going to step aside, take a quick time out. We will have more of Sports for CLE from the NFL Scouting Combine in Indianapolis, Indiana.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
Sports for CLE continues from the NFL Scouting Combine in Indianapolis, Indiana, and we are pleased to have one of the top draft analysts anywhere, Dane Brugler from The Athletic. The Beast is out this year already. Just a great draft analyst. Dane, appreciate the time. I know this is a busy time for you.
Of course.
Cleveland Browns, they draft late in the second round. They have some needs. What makes sense to you at that position for the Browns?
We'll obviously have to see how free agency plays out. That'll play a factor. This is a really good year for receivers. Every year is going to be a good year for receivers, it feels like. Every year we're talking about these guys. But where they're drafting, just outside the top 50, I think there'll be some receivers in play for them. To the point where, they're going to be sitting there and getting a little antsy. Some of these receivers are, make it out of the top 40, and it's like, do we go up and get them? Do we stay pat and see who comes to us? Defensive tackle, I think, is a position they need to look at, get better in the middle. Again, we'll see with free agency what they do, but you want more depth in the middle, especially for that Jim Schwartz defense. So you get more explosiveness on offense. You want to get more reinforcements in that front seven on defense. At some point, you figure they'll probably draft a running back, add more to that room. So plenty of options. It's a bummer. I mean, hey, I'm a Northeast Ohio guy. I want to be talking first rounders with you, but still, I think with the way it'll play out, second, third round, there'll still be some quality players.
Who are some guys that you think might be available that would be huge gets? We'll start with wide receivers at that 54. If somebody slides, and you could see that and go, that's a really good match.
Troy Franklin from Oregon, I think, makes a lot of sense. He has speed, but he's not only speed. I think he can win on the perimeter. Young player, he's been productive at Oregon, so he's a name that makes sense. Xavier Worthy from Texas, he is what he is because of his size. But again, when you have that speed, that can really make a difference in your offense. In today's NFL, that explosiveness is everything. So Xavier Worthy would be in that mix. I really like Roman Wilson from Michigan, a little undersized. You have to, when you're talking second round, you're sacrificing something. With Roman Wilson, you're sacrificing size, but he has the speed. He's a speedster. He's going to test really well this week here. Malachi Corley from Western Kentucky is a guy that a little bit different than these other guys because of his ability to create after the catch and trying to prove himself as more than just an underneath guy. He can win deep as well. But again, I think this is a good receiver class if you want different types of receivers. They're going to have some options there in the second round.
All right, we'll move to defensive tackle. Who are some guys that intrigue you that could be second, third, maybe even fourth round picks that can play?
Yeah, Chris Jenkins, the Michigan. He's different than his dad. His dad was 360 pounds going to Pro Bowls. The younger Chris, is 295, and he's going to test really well here. The muscle twitch that he moves with is crazy. You look at a stat sheet and it doesn't blow you away, but when you look at the tape and you see how Michigan used him and the rotation that they had, you understand it a little bit more, and you see the way he moves, you see the way he can stack, shed, get off blocks, rally to the football. This is a good football player. So somewhere on day two, I think Chris Jenkins would make a lot of sense. It's not the best defensive tackle year. We might see 1, 2, maybe 3 go in the first round, and then who would fall at that point? I think it's a group that teams want to see more of these guys. Ruka Rohoro from Clemson. He's a guy that has more flash maybe than consistency, but when you look at the traits and you see 6'2.5", you see over 300 pounds, the way he can move, it's like, okay, I'm going to bet on those traits and let's see what happens. Get him with our coaching staff. So it's you might have to take a leap of faith with some of these defensive tackles. That's just what the draft is giving us this year.
Are there guys that get up? Jim Schwartz likes to attack it.
100%.
Are there guys that play into that in that range, do you think?
Yeah, I do think that Rook from Clemson can do that. He's got the athleticism to do it. I was just talking to him a couple minutes ago. He's talking about what he can do on the basketball court, and I mean he's an all-around athlete. Doesn't lack for confidence either. But yeah, he's a good player, and we didn't get a chance to see him at the Senior Bowl, so eager to see him out here moving around. Since we haven't seen him in a couple months, but I think he would fit that mold of a guy that can shoot gaps, get upfield, disrupt what the quarterback's doing.
Let's talk a little bit about running backs. That's another area, no one knows the health of Nick Chubb.
Right.
If anybody can come back from it, it's Nick Chubb.
Mm-hmm.
But I would expect them to look at that position later in the draft. Who are some guys that could be there that would be intriguing?
And this is a running back class where we might not have a top 50 pick, but after the top 50, we're going to see a run on these guys. Third round, fourth round, a lot of good running backs, depending on if you're looking for more of a pass catcher, if you're looking for more of a power guy. All these guys offer you something a little bit different. So I think, there's a good chance they could be looking for more versatility. A guy like Bucky Irving from Oregon. Heck, just keep an Oregon theme going. We'll go Troy Franklin and then Brandon Dorlus, the defensive tackle, and then Bucky Irving. we'll just all ducks for the Browns this year, and it wouldn't be the worst strategy, honestly, because that would be a pretty nice haul. But Bucky Irving's, he's undersized, he's 190 pounds. He's more of a complimentary back, but man, he runs his tail off, and he can catch the ball in the backfield. He's a player that's easy to like.
There's a couple of guys that are younger and bigger. Eric Estime, Braylon Allen from Wisconsin. How do they fit into the scheme? And are those guys? The Browns have they like to draft younger guys.
Sure.
They're not married to it, but it's a trend.
And you won't find anyone younger in this class than Braylon Allen. He literally just turned 20 years old, which is crazy. But because he reclassified as a senior in high school, he's able to do that. So he's the youngest player, probably one of the youngest players I've ever evaluated in the draft process. So that certainly works in his favor. We'll see what he runs. Big, physical, over under 238 pounds. That'll be interesting. If he slims down to run well, but I think he's probably best right around 238, 240. An Estime, man, he's a mini Hulk. I mean, he is just shredded, and he runs like it too. He runs with attitude. What I like most about him is, man, he'll hit you in pass protection, and we know if you want to get on the field in the NFL as a running back, you better, in a complementary role, you better be able to pass protect so the coaches trust you. They can put you on the field in any situation. Estime certainly gives you that. So I think both Braylon Allen, Audric Estime, somewhere in that third round, I think makes sense for teams.
I mentioned the guardrails and the age. When you look at the Browns and how they draft, do those things factor into their evaluation process, do you think?
Oh, there's no doubt it does. I mean, but I think it's more of a preference than it is a hard, fast rule. Ideally, sure, you'd love your highest ranked guys on your board based on tape study to be the younger guys and not 24-year-olds. But, it's tricky with age because youth doesn't always guarantee upside. Some guys hit their ceiling of who they are at 20 years old. That's just, facts of life. A lot of guys, though, they still have meat on the bone, and you can get more out of them. And I think the Browns understand that. And so, ideally, they're drafting younger players. And I think it's really important in the first few rounds. After you get outside the first few rounds, I think they're more willing to get away from that a little bit and make sure they're just getting good football players.
Yeah, I guess the thought being if they're in the younger 20, if you're under like 24, by the time you're on your second contract, you're not 30.
Right.
You want to avoid the 30 mark.
No
in the
doubt.
NFL.
Right.
Who are some guys you evaluate and you like? And I don't mean everybody knows the top guys.
Right. Have you heard of Marvin Harrison? Yeah.
So guys that you really look at the tape and go, this guy can play.
I mean, really every position. There's a couple guys that I just love maybe more than other people. At corner, Andrew Phillips from Kentucky. He's we can get so caught up in some of all the things we look for at each position. At corner, is he fast and is he competitive? If you're those two things, I can work with you. And Andrew Phillips is certainly that for coming out of Kentucky. But no interceptions. Like there's things that work against him that'll push him down the board. But I would love to take a chance on him. Austin Booker, the edge rusher out of Kansas, he's a puppy. He's still so young. He has 500 snaps on defense in college, but to me, he is exactly who the Browns would be looking at because he's young. You're buying low, betting on that ascent, and he's a guy that the best football is ahead of him because he's long and he's fast, but he's more than that. He understands how to play the run. He's a smart player. So I think he should be going higher than he currently is.
Before I let you go, the quarterbacks they're in news every year.
Yeah.
When you look at this quarterback class, who do you really like, and how good can Caleb Williams be, I guess, is the biggest question.
I mean, he's going to go one. He's going to be a Chicago Bear, and so much of where these guys go is how the team is prepared to handle that, and bring them along. Most times you look at the guys that have busted, and a lot of times the situation is a big factor there. So are the Bears equipped to surround him with the best talent, the best in terms of play calling, the coaching, the development? Do they understand him, his psyche, to understand how to reach him and really build him up? These are the questions you need to be asking yourself before you draft a quarterback. And I think there's a good chance we see quarterback, 1, 2, 3. And the Bears, the Commanders, and the Patriots, or another team if they trade up to 3, you need to ask yourself, okay, we like the player on tape. He's clearly talented. Do we have the infrastructure, the coaching to make sure we're maximizing what he can be for us? And if the answer is not certainly yes, absolutely, you probably should be looking in a different direction.
I lied. I got one more. When you draft a player, obviously it's not always probably after the first round. You can't say, okay, we need to fill this hole with this player. How much of it is projection, and is it traits, is it qualities? What do you look for?
Yeah, the slogan of the draft is traits over production. That's what scouts are looking for, what translates to the next level. And if I'm Andrew Barry, I have in my office a 2024 depth chart, and then I've got a 2025 depth chart that I'm projecting forward and saying, okay, well, we drafted this guy last year in the 3rd round. We're projecting him 2025 he'll be a starter. Cedric Tillman maybe, Siaki Ika, the nose tackle out of Baylor. You always draft with a plan in place of, okay, we feel like he'll be ready year 2, compete for starting reps, or maybe not till year 3. I mean, that you go into it, and then maybe during training camp that changes a little bit based off of how they perform in camp and throughout the season. So it's the draft. There is a certain element of luck and a crapshoot, but no doubt, that's why all these area scouts do all the work, and they put a plan in place that we feel like he can get on the field as a rookie. We feel like he can get on the field at some point year 2. Like, you have to have that projection, and that's a key part of this. It's not just what he can do, strengths, weaknesses, but when will he be able to help us? If it's not right away, when will it be? And that's not always an easy thing to do.
Dane Brugler from The Athletic, author of The Beast.
Yep.
Appreciate it very much. Thanks very much for the time and the insight. Dane Brugler, one of the best draft analysts anywhere from The Athletic. That's going to do it for this edition of Sports for CLE from the NFL Scouting Combine in Indianapolis. We'll see you tomorrow at 4. Have a great night, everybody. See you tomorrow at 4 on Sports for CLE.